Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. Canada's inflation rate increased month over month. We're going to talk about what that means for the Vancouver real estate market and the Bank of Canada's next interest rate decision. We're also going to talk about another development, this time in downtown Vancouver, going under receivership, and then I'm going to give you a feet on the street perspective of what's happening in the market. Real quick, if this is your first time to the channel, my name is Hassan. I'm a real estate agent in the Vancouver area, and I make educational real estate content to help you on your real estate journey. I also make content designed to help you make your move in and around Vancouver. So if that sounds interesting to you and you wanted to chat with me one-on-one, you can book me for a free call in the Calendly link below. And regardless, subscribe to this channel so you don't miss a future video. All right, so we have lots to cover in this week's video. We're going to start with Canada's inflation rate increasing to 3.4% month over month. A large chunk of this was widely expected by analysts and economists. A large chunk of this had to do with extremely low gasoline prices last year that we're comparing to. So really gas was one of the main reasons that we saw inflation tick upwards. Now, headlines everywhere when this comes out. Obviously, the next question is, what does this mean for the Bank of Canada when it comes to interest rates? What are they going to do with the rate? I don't think any sentiment has changed that this year is going to be a year of rate cuts by the Bank of Canada. Some talk as to when those rate cuts are going to be seen in the market. Most are still suggesting that sometime around the middle of this year is when we will start seeing some rate cuts. But myself personally, when I look at the inflation number and I look at the state of the market, I truly think that this was a very, positive piece of caution to come out for the Vancouver real estate market. And the reality is that the last thing the Vancouver real estate market needs right now in this moment in time is an interest rate cut. We really don't need it. The market has changed considerably as I sit here today than when we were talking in early December, November. And the last thing we need right now is a rate cut to incite more activity in the market. I will touch more deeply on that in a second. But again, rate cuts still to come this year. That's what, again, most economists are suggesting, most of the major banks, that they will come. But now this gives the Bank of Canada perhaps some pause. And they have a rate decision coming up next week, January 24th. I think most people are suggesting and still thinking that we are going to see them hold off on any cut or increase, probably hold the rate where it's at. And again, I think these headlines that are coming out, I had felt, I think a couple videos ago, I mentioned how I was feeling there was just much too much optimism in the Vancouver real estate market. And so I think headline like this that says, look, don't get your hopes up that we're going to see a rate cut in Q1. I think that's a positive thing. When I look at what is happening in the market now, beginning of December, I did a video saying, look, spring market's coming early this year. January, we're going to jump out the gate. And that is exactly what is happening. Seeing properties now, many properties entering multiple offers, whether or not they're holding an offer presentation date or not. Properties that have been on the market for 2-3 months, all of a sudden on a given day, they're getting 2 or 3 offers. There's one property that we were going to look at downtown, and downtown condos typically, and even today, there's some of the most inventory for downtown condos. And so usually Q4 of last year, I was able to go into these properties, take my time negotiating, grind out, better deals for buyers because of the amount of time and how few buyers you were competing with. Today, I look at a downtown Vancouver condo. We want to go view it. Been on the market for 3 months. Looks like a prime target to nab a really great deal on, under contract. I had a colleague of mine. She had an assignment listing. So assignments are before the building is even built. Before a buyer can actually view it, they're purchasing the pre-sale contract. She had it for months, not too much action, and then all of a sudden, in the span of 24 hours, 4 hours on that assignment, 4 offers on that assignment listing. So just gives you a state of the market in terms of what's happening. January has really jumped out the gate in terms of buyer activity, offer presentation dates being set again, multiple offers on any property of quality, really. If it's priced correctly, it is seeing those multiple offers. So we're back at it. And again, if we had seen more optimism, if we had inflation numbers drop and a lot of headlines saying, will we see a rate cut next week? I think that I don't think that would have been very positive for the real estate market overall when I look at the long-term market. But that's what's happening. When I look at mortgage rates specifically, they're getting really, really competitive on the fixed side of the equation. Just had a client, we put them into a property, viewers from YouTube as well, and they managed to get a 5-year fixed under 5%, 4.9 some odd from one of the major banks. And that's the first time I've seen someone secure in a long time under 5% for a 5-year fix on an uninsured mortgage, right? So generally those have higher rates. They did really well. So the banks are getting much more competitive with these fixed mortgage rates already. Buyers are coming back into the market. They're starting to see that they can get approved for a little bit more money, a little bit more house. That's definitely putting pressure on all sides of the market, but on the low end, on the condos, the 1 and 2 bedroom entry level condos are really, really hot, especially if you're looking in quality areas such as, Brentwood, Metrotown. Richmond is always hot, I would say, just based on that inventory spectrum. So a lot of activity, a lot of showings happening. Open houses are busy again. And here's where we're at. In terms of inventory, I just touched on it. I do want to quickly touch on inventory downtown. Like I mentioned, a lot of condo inventory there. We're starting to see people gear up, I guess you could say, for the Airbnb legislation changes. So more listings hitting the market. Also more rentals hitting the market as well. And that's a unique story about what's happening in the Lower Mainland when it comes to rents. Over the last several months, we've seen rents stabilize in many Lower Mainland cities, including Vancouver, since about the end of summer. And in fact, month over month in Vancouver, we saw a drop on 1-bedroom rents about 5%. The average is around $2,700 per month. Now, a lot of this, keep in mind, is seasonal, but when you look at year over year, the type of rent increases we've had year over year, at some point, at what point does it become unsustainable? And what do tenants do? They have to live in a certain area. They have to live within a certain proximity to work. Of course, they need shelter over their head. And one of the trends that we see a lot more of on the mortgage side and then also on the rental side is more people coming together to support that mortgage or more people coming together to pay that rent. For example, the percentage of Metro Vancouverites where there are 3 people or more paying the rent on a property and the mortgage, that has more than doubled over the last couple decades here in Vancouver, and it continues to grow that percentage. So ultimately what we see happening is we see more tenants living under one roof on the rental side of the equation to live in the areas that they need to live. But then I mentioned a few videos ago, also on the mortgage side, a lot more co-signers, a lot more people coming together to purchase properties, family members, even people that don't know each other, co-ownership, a lot of co-ownership happening, a lot more than happened in the past. Of course, there's a whole host of issues and things that you want to check off if you're going to go down that route. I'll probably do another video specifically on that. But these are kind of some of the trends that we're seeing. And rent stabilizing. I think over time this year we will continue to see rental rates go up. Interesting thing to tie into this is one of BC's largest unions, the BCGEU, is calling on the provincial government to bring in vacancy control. And vacancy control is different than rent control. So what we have in BC right now is rent control, meaning if you have the same tenant in place annually, you can only raise the rent a certain percentage. Right now it's 3.5% for this year, and you can do that once per year. Vacancy control, on the other hand, is protecting the rents once that tenant leaves for the next tenant coming in. So it's actually tied to the property, to the rental versus the tenant. Right now, if that tenant leaves on their own accord, the landlord can now rent it out at market rents. And that's a bit of a saving grace for landlords that have seen, their costs increase all across the board. Strata fees, repairs and maintenance, anytime they need some work done, labor is up, cost of borrowing. There's so many increases in costs, and they haven't been able to recoup that through rental increases. So this has been a bit of a saving grace that if a tenant does leave, you can catch back up to market. And so this union is coming out and saying, you know what, we need to put a stop to this. We need vacancy control. I believe it'll never happen. It will never work. And the reason for this is if we look at rentals on a larger scale, and we've talked several times on my channel how we just do not have the rental housing inventory or the inventory for sale to accommodate everybody and everybody else coming in. But if we look at it rental specific, these projects are very tough to pencil for developers, for the numbers to make sense at today's borrowing rates, today's construction costs. Now imagine going to a developer and saying, you know, that one opportunity that we give you to catch your revenue or try to catch your revenue up to your costs when a tenant leaves. And I'm talking about, you know, a rental developer that's building out a tower, you know, to never give them the opportunity where if a tenant leaves that they can catch back up to market rents. It would kill any sort of limited appetite there already is for rental housing. It would kill any sort of appetite for that moving forward. Even housing that's built stratified for sale, there's often a rental housing component that needs to be built into that project. That would be a long and sticky negotiation as well. So it would just quell any sort of appetite for rental housing. I don't think it's the path to go down, but it is something that is being talked about. I don't see it happening, but again, that's something that, you know, we'll say it's on the table. It's the largest union in BC putting it forth to the provincial government. I mentioned off the top, because we're starting to talk a little bit about development here, a project in downtown Vancouver enters receivership. This was to be a 55-story tower. 55-story tower right around on Harrow, right off of Burrard in the west end of downtown Vancouver. Now, the interesting note about this project is I did a video a while back saying when I was a first-time buyer, I made a big mistake as a first-time buyer. I was choosing between two properties, and I ended up going with the safe pick that was in an area that was, you know, closer to my friends, closer to my family. It was fully renovated. It didn't really have a lot of long-term potential, and so I chose that property over one downtown that ultimately sold in a strata windup where all of the owners got essentially a 7-figure check for their property. And it just turns out that this development site I'm talking about right now happens to be that project where I would have bought in. Now, to give you some bit of background with this, purchased in 2018, the land was, I believe it was 2 parcels together, purchased for just over 170 million. Obviously, with a lot of changes in costs and financial pressures last year, this developer essentially went to put it to market, and they started taking bids for this land. So purchased in 2018, 170 million. The largest bid they got was under $100 million in 2023. So 5 years later, under $100 million, basically 50% less than what they paid. I think the strongest offer they had was just over $90 million. They didn't accept it. It now enters receivership, and you know, that project obviously unlikely to move forward. The reason I bring this up, and you know, that $93 million that I talk about, that offer, developers don't pull these offers out of thin air. Right? They don't just grab a number and say, this is what I'm willing to pay. The way they get to this number of 93 is they work backwards. To oversimplify the equation, they're basically looking at a top line revenue. So they're saying, okay, these units, once completed, how much are we going to be able to sell them for a price per square foot basis? And they extrapolate that out to understand what sort of revenue they're going to get. Then, of course, they build in their cost, their borrowing costs, the construction costs for materials, for labor, the soft costs that continue to go up that they pay to the city. They build in a contingency. And of course, in a market where things are up in the air, there's a little bit more uncertainty. That contingency percentage increases. They have to build in their profit, of course, because no one does this for free. They build in the profit, and long story short, right at the bottom is where they come out with a final number, and that is the land price. That is the price that they're willing to pay for the land so that all of the other numbers make sense. And so they didn't just come out with 93 million. This shows you what has happened, not just with the real estate market downtown in terms of resale prices, but also what's happened on the construction side, on the lending side, the labor, all of these costs going up, contingency needing to go up as well. And so that's ultimately the land price they came to. Now, when it was bought for 170 million, you can bet that a pro forma was also created at that time. a similar sort of pro forma. Now, some developers will take on more risk than others. I find that a lot of longer term, say established developers, they already have a name for themselves, for instance, they are very tight and strict to their pro forma. They have good faith in the numbers that they have written down, and they don't deviate off of that land price once they get there. Now, some developers, they take on a little bit more risk because they may look at it and say, look, to have our name on this downtown project, 55 stories, and I'm just taking this one as an example. I'm not saying that's the case for this one, but in general, to have your name on a downtown tower, some developers out there, they will take on more risk. They will take on a land cost at a bit higher of a price because of what it can do for their business. It can boost the business. And so anyways, long story short, over the last 5 years, this gives you a really good indication of what has happened to development land values in downtown Vancouver. So that's an example of that. So I did just talk about how, there are more rentals hitting the market as well as more listings downtown with the Airbnb legislation coming up. Very quickly, Kelowna has, in advance of these, the start of the Airbnb legislations beginning May 1st, I guess you could say, they have had a council meeting where they've essentially put their own rules out for Airbnb. I don't see any difference between what's going to happen on May 1st in terms of it needing to be your principal residence. So Kelowna is fully on board, I guess you could say, even though they were going to have to be on board. Kelowna is kind of one of those unique cities where obviously it has a very large touristy element to it. So there's a lot of people watching what was going to happen in Kelowna. We knew that they were going to have to conform with the policies set forth by the BC provincial government. So when I look at what Kelowna is doing here, again, I need to look deeper into it, but it doesn't look like there's anything vastly different than what they're going to have to do anyways. So yeah, I don't know if this is a way for Kelowna to kind of step in and say, no, we realize that this is a problem. We want to start this process early. We are fully on board with this. I'm not sure. Nothing happened last year, but this is kind of where they're at. So we know that Kelowna is on board. Their city council is on board with the short-term rental restrictions. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens there. There are quite a few pre-sale developments sold there, specifically under the pretense of these are ideal for short-term rentals. And they sold at higher prices than comparable pre-sales that didn't allow for short-term rentals. So there's a chunk of purchasers here that have paid more money for these units because they were expecting they were going to be able to get additional revenue from those units, but it's not looking like that's going to be the case. So there you have it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this week's video. If you did, hit the like button, because what it does is it takes the video and it sends it out to more people so they can learn from it as well. And if you enjoy weekly real estate content, subscribe to this channel so you don't miss next week's video. And lastly, once again, if you're in the Vancouver area or the Fraser Valley and you want to talk about your real estate situation with me one-on-one, you can book me for a call in the Calendly link below, or just send me a text, give me a call, shoot me an email, whatever works best for you. But I want to thank you for tuning in to this week's episode, and I look forward to seeing you next week.